listener production.
Hello, Natarsha Belling with you, and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the damning report into some of our top superannuation funds. Why poor service and delayed payouts on claims are now the norm. We reveal why you need to get on top of your super and the simple, quick tips to get the best deal. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Monday, the 31st of March. A 47-year-old woman is under police guard in hospital as police continue to investigate the stabbing attacks of 3 children in Sydney's northwest. It's believed the mother, who suffered self-inflicted stab wounds, has been arrested over the attempted triple murder-suicide. The children, aged 10, 13 and 16, are all in a stable condition in hospital. This was police speaking about the scene earlier today.
It's very early stages of the investigation. Until we have an opportunity to speak to her, we won't know what her intent was, but we're certainly taking it as a potential attempted murder.
The father, who was home at the time, reportedly tried to intervene and then called authorities. AFL great Danielle Laidley has revealed she is battling a rare brain tumour. Doctors found the tumour after months of headaches. It is benign, but pressing on Danielle's spinal cord, and therefore she will need surgery. And some of the cast of the hit series The White Lotus has arrived in Australia. Patrick Schwarzenegger, the son of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Maria Shriver, is here for a star-studded event to promote the series along with co-stars Leslie Bibb and Natasha Rothwell. Now it's time to get into our deep dive with Kirby Rappell, the Executive Director of Super Rating, to unpack today's damning report into some of our top super funds from our corporate watchdog. Find out exactly why you need to care about your super balance as much as your bank balance and the top tips to get the best deal. Kirby, thanks so much for joining us. These are pretty bombshell findings from ASIC on what is going on with our super funds and really the dodgy practices they're engaging in.
Look, I've been researching super funds for 16 years, and even for me, it's been a bit of a bombshell day to sit back and go, well, are funds up to the task and are they doing what their members need? And obviously, you think about the families who've been impacted by this.
Now, in regards to some of these findings, this latest report from ASIC into super funds was focusing at this stage on the fact that these super funds were delaying paying out death benefits to those people that had paid insurance premiums. Now, there was one circumstance where it took Australian Super more than 3 years to pay a claim to a relative of a dead member. Now, this just isn't an issue, Kirby, for elderly Australians, thinking when you get to 60 or 70 and need your super. This is an issue that can affect any Australian at any age.
Yeah, I think that's the really important point here. Obviously, there's people that can be impacted passing away tragically in their 20s, 30s, 40s and 50s. This isn't an elderly person issue, I suspect, in many cases. It's people that need the help most, and the funds need to be focused on service and giving their members what they need.
So how can they justify, are they strategically delaying this payment? Because this is unacceptable. If you've paid those premiums and you're entitled to that benefit, especially if you've lost a loved one, financially you might be in serious trouble. 3 years to pay a claim to the relative of a dead person?
Yeah, so I think 3 years, it's not a justifiable outcome in the slightest. I think the thing to note here is a couple of things. Firstly, the insurer will assess the claim. That can get involved with third parties. That can take too long. That then gets paid to the super fund, and then the super fund pays the money. So there's too many steps. It is quite complicated. And how do you make this simple to make sure that people get the help they need when they need it, as well as people know the steps they can take to take control of it to make sure they're looking after their family.
So, Kirby, if we can talk about unpacking super, because I heard a financial expert say the other day, we need to treat our super funds like we treat our bank accounts. It's really important to check what contributions are being made and what fees and charges are coming out of our money. It's not the super fund's money, it's our money.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, a super fund's job is to give you your money back in retirement. And so I think you make a really important point. When was the last time any of us checked what our super looks like online? Do you know only 60% of funds have an app? But maybe something while people are listening to this, they could Google, do you have a super fund app? Have I downloaded it? Can I see my super right now? That'd be a great step for today.
In regards to ASIC again, they highlighted and heavily criticised two of the biggest super funds in Australia, being Australian Super and CBUS. So you have to be very carefully legally with this, but do you think the industry needs a massive shake-up, that these super funds are doing the right thing by us?
I think there's been huge growth in the size of super funds with people putting more of their wage away for super. Funds have grown a lot. And we've got a real challenge here where there's actually less super funds and they're getting a lot bigger. And the key question I think that needs to get answered over the next while is, well, is bigger better? It can be, but we've got to get the right levels of service coming through. We all know about performance, we all know about fees, but we've got to make sure that the service is flowing through. And I think it's highlighting a real thing that next to your bank, your super's probably got the next most amount of money in your life. And so increasingly that expectation is rising a lot. And how do you make sure you're with a fund that's giving service so that it's looking after your interests as best you can?
Now, in regards, Kirby, to a lot of super funds, and you only realise this once you've had a family member or a friend have an experience, unfortunately, with the negative impact of this. Within your super fund, there are sometimes these added policies that are actually quite cheap to pay with premiums, sometimes $10 or $15 a week. Now, in some circumstances, they're supposed to give you extra coverage with total death and permanent disability. But in some circumstances, some say they're actually junk policies. They're not even giving you the coverage that you need. How can you simply explain that to people that want to get the best coverage and also not waste their money?
Look, that's a great question. Firstly is you've got to know what insurance you've got. I think for a lot of people, they probably don't realise they get given default insurance if you're over 25 and have an account balance of over $6,000. And you can actually go and customise how much cover you've got. So if you want to make sure, if you maybe had a child recently or bought a house, you're probably going to need a bit more cover. So you can go and talk to your fund and see how much you can get. And sometimes you can get extra cover without any questions if you've recently bought a house or had a child, is a good example. So you want to make sure you're looked after there. Secondly, you can get quotes outside super. Usually the rates inside super are pretty competitive, so you want to make sure you stack up both. But I think all of this is coming back to, are you getting engaged? And so I think it is really difficult for those who have been impacted and going through a death claim of the families trying to deal with the super fund. I think that the real challenge here is, how do you make sure that you've got all your affairs in order to make sure your family's looked after and protected? And the best way is to make sure that you're engaged with your super.
In regards to engaging, sometimes one may argue there's certain insurance companies or certain super funds that make it as complicated as possible. What would you advise people to do, i.e. to know, I don't need that junk policy, I'm actually going to get better coverage if I go out to an outside insurance company? But it's so incredibly complicated and people don't have the time.
Yeah, so I think on average, you find you might save a little bit having inside your super, but you've got to engage and know you've got it and know what you're paying for. The second thing is make sure that level of cover is reasonable. There should be insurance calculators on the ASIC Money Smart website. Get a bit of a feel for, have you got enough insurance or not? And then thirdly, probably harking back to some of the things we're talking about today, unfortunately, there's a thing called a binding nomination. So you can actually tell your super fund who you want the money paid to. And so it does remove a layer of decision making by a trustee of a super fund about, well, who are the beneficiaries, where should it get paid to? You can actually go through the binding nomination process and it removes any grey area for you of what your intentions are. But you've got to review it from time to time. That lasts a couple of years. There's also a thing called a non-lapsing, non-binding nomination. So it's no jargon here at all today, Natarsha. But the piece is that lasts forever. But if you, for example, go through a marriage breakup and you haven't updated that, that may have unintended consequences too. So I think checking in, you probably every 2 or 3 years at least, I need to be checking in on my super and making sure it's all up to date.
You make a great point there, because the majority of Australians would go and take their super fund or start contributing to their super fund as soon as they get a job. Now, when you're an 18-year-old, you may have your beneficiary as your parents. And then some people may not go and double check that nomination and circumstances may have dramatically changed.
Yeah, it totally has. And so if you think about, for me, I've got kids, young kids, and so you think about, well, the level of debt that you might have in your life is quite different. So it's going back and checking these things from time to time is just super important. And look, I'm a bit lazy. I just like to go check it on my phone. And I think it's good that super funds are finally catching up a bit more there. But I think that's the important thing. You can probably see how much insurance you've got once you log in on the app. It's probably getting over the initial speed hump of how on earth do I log into another website.
Now, Kirby, from an overall point of view, pretty damning findings from ASIC. They were very, very, and rightfully so, condemned the actions of these super funds. From an overall point of view, do we need to see better regulation and these super funds and their managerial structure, board directors or CEOs, held to account for this?
Yeah, so there's some big changes coming in super already ahead of this called the Financial Accountability Regime that covers banks and super funds, which has a much more direct impact on those people working inside a super fund to make sure there's consequences. So that is coming through very, very shortly. But yes, service needs to lift in super. Making sure that people can get what they need when they need it is really important. There's some funds doing a good job. They were noted in the report. There's some funds not doing a good enough job and they need to sort it out. Thirdly, I think over the long term, what we're seeing as a trend here is that the sector has grown. Performance has been pretty competitive. If you look at building your nest egg, fees are getting better. There's still room to do there. But we haven't really talked in super enough about service, and we need to make sure that the service levels meet the expectations of Australians, because I think at the moment that's been coming up a little bit short for a number of funds at the present second.
We appreciate your analysis and thoughts. Thank you very much, Kirby.
Thanks so much.
That was Kirby Rappell from Super Rating. And if you want to find out more about understanding your super, a great website is moneysmart.gov.au. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us so you don't miss our episodes or our deep dive of the day. You can also follow us on our socials, at Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and also on TikTok and YouTube. You just need to search Listener Newsroom. That's spelled LISTNR. And we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company. See you tomorrow.